By the 1630s, surgeons working for the East India Company believed they had solved one of the deadliest problems at sea. Scurvy had already killed sailors by the hundreds of thousands across the age of sail. Some historians estimate the death toll from scurvy during this era reached into the millions. The company's answer was a shriveled brown pod from a tree that most European sailors had never seen growing. They called it tamarind, and they mixed it into barley water and handed it out on ships bound for Asia. For roughly a century, this remedy was treated as settled medical fact. It was not settled, and it was not fact. That failure and what it cost sits near the middle of this story, but the story itself does not begin on the deck of a company ship. It begins more than 1,000 years earlier, in the dry savannas of Africa. Tamarindus indica, the tree that produces the fruit called tamarind, is now generally accepted by botanists as native to tropical Africa. Genetic and botanical evidence points to a broad origin zone stretching from Sudan through the Sahel toward Senegal, with some researchers also proposing Madagascar as a possible birthplace. The exact location is still debated among specialists, and no single site has been confirmed. What is clear is that the tree suited some of the harshest growing conditions in Africa. It tolerated drought, poor soil, and long dry seasons better than most food crops. In many African communities, the tamarind tree became a literal gathering place, valued as much for its wide shade as for its fruit. It is sometimes called the palaver tree because people would sit beneath it to talk, trade, and settle disputes, much like village trees have served similar social roles in other parts of the world. Its fruit was eaten fresh or dried, its leaves and bark were used in various traditional remedies, and its dense, heavy wood was carved into tools, furniture, and construction material. Very little of the tree went to waste, which is part of why it became so deeply embedded in the daily life of the communities that grew alongside it. For a very long stretch of human history, tamarind's story was almost entirely an African one, unfolding quietly across dry savanna landscapes long before it carried any of the names by which the world knows it today. At some point in the ancient past, tamarind crossed from Africa to the Indian subcontinent. Researchers do not agree on exactly when this happened. Wood charcoal evidence suggests the tree was already present in India by around 1300 BCE, which has led some botanists to argue it may be effectively native to South Asia as well, even if its deeper ancestry traces back to Africa. Ancient Sanskrit texts, including material from the Brahma Samhita, composed sometime between roughly 1200 and 200 BCE, refer to the tree using the word amlika. This shows that tamarind was already woven into Indian life well over 2,000 years ago. Exactly how the tree crossed the Indian Ocean is not documented. It likely traveled along early maritime trade routes that connected East Africa to the western coast of India, carried by people moving goods, not by any single expedition history remembers by name. Once in India, tamarind did not stay a minor ingredient. It became central to South Asian cooking, prized for the sharp sourness it added to curries, chutneys, and pickles. Food historians describe it as one of the defining sour notes of South Indian cuisine in particular, though its use spread across the subcontinent over time. It also entered Ayurvedic medicine, where its pulp, bark, and leaves were used in various remedies related to digestion and fever. Alongside its culinary and medicinal roles, tamarind also became woven into local folklore. One widely told legend holds that the fruit falls from the tree while still unripe because a goddess once cursed it after injuring her foot on the tree's bark. This story is a piece of cultural tradition, not a documented historical event, and it is worth naming as legend rather than history, even though it says something real about how deeply tamarind was woven into everyday belief and storytelling. By the early centuries of the Common Era, tamarind's reputation in India had grown strong enough that traders from far outside the region began to notice it. Arab and Persian merchants traveling to India's western coast encountered the fruit and were struck by its sticky, brown, date-like pulp. Believing it resembled the dates they knew from the Middle East, they gave it a name that has outlasted empires. They called it Tamar. Hindi meaning date of India. That Arabic name is the direct ancestor of the English word tamarind. It is also the reason the fruit's most common European name has nothing to do with its true African origin, and instead points toward India, where outsiders first became widely familiar with it. Arab traders did more than name the fruit. They carried it along Indian Ocean trade networks toward the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Peninsula, and eventually into the broader Islamic world. Tamarind entered medieval Islamic medicine as a recognized remedy. The physician and scholar Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, documented it in his medical encyclopedia, the Kanun, completed in the early 11th century. Avicenna listed tamarind under the Arabic name Tamar Hindi and described therapeutic uses for it, including as a treatment associated with fever. Some historians of herbal medicine have suggested that tamarind's presence in Mediterranean and Islamic medical writing may predate its documented arrival in some other regions, though the exact timeline of its spread west of India remains unclear and is treated by scholars as an open question rather than settled history. From these Arab and Persian trade networks, tamarind moved further outward. It became naturalized across parts of Southeast Asia by the medieval period, carried along the same trade and religious networks that spread spices, textiles, and ideas across the region. Buddhist monks and Hindu traders are credited with helping disseminate the fruit and its uses along overland and maritime routes connecting South Asia to Southeast Asia. In time, tamarind became deeply embedded in the cuisines of Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. In the Philippines specifically, tamarind became a defining ingredient in sinigang, a sour soup that remains a staple of Filipino home cooking today, and in sampalok candy, a traditional sweet made from cooked tamarind pulp. Tamarind's adaptability made this spread easier than it might have been for a more delicate crop. The tree tolerates heat, poor soil, and long dry spells, which meant it could be planted successfully almost anywhere traders carried its seeds, from humid Southeast Asian coastlines to arid stretches of the Arabian Peninsula. By the height of the medieval trade era, tamarind had already crossed 3 continents without the involvement of a single named explorer or monarch. It moved the way most food history actually moves, through ordinary traders, cooks, and travelers, one exchange at a time, largely undocumented by the kind of official records historians usually rely on. The next major shift came with European maritime expansion. In the early 16th, hundreds Portuguese and Spanish colonizers introduced tamarind to the Caribbean and to Mexico. It took root quickly in the warm climates of Central America. Within Mexican cuisine, tamarind eventually became the base for aguas frescas, tamarind-flavored candies, and the sweet, sour, and often chili-dusted confections that are still sold across the country today. This colonial-era introduction is the reason tamarind now feels as native to Mexican street food culture as it does to South Asian kitchens, even though the tree itself did not grow wild in the Americas before European contact. Over the following centuries, Mexican confectioners built an entire category of candy around the fruit, blending its sourness with sugar, salt, and chili to create the sweet, sour, salty, and spicy combination that remains a hallmark of Mexican candy today. Brands built specifically around tamarind pulp, chili, powder, and salt have existed in Mexico for decades, and tamarind-flavored candies remain among the most recognizable Mexican confections sold internationally. The same pattern repeated itself in the Caribbean, where tamarind became a base for sweetened drinks and confections that are still made in home kitchens today. It was also during this broader era of European maritime expansion that tamarind found its way onto a very different kind of ship, one facing one of the deadliest medical crises in naval history. This brings the story back to where it opened. Scurvy, a disease we now know is caused by a severe lack of vitamin C, had plagued sailors for centuries. Ancient Egyptian medical writing, including the Ebers Papyrus dated to around 1500 BCE, already described symptoms consistent with scurvy. But the disease became a true crisis during the long ocean voyages of the Age of Sail, when ships carried no fresh fruit or vegetables for months at a time. Historians estimate that scurvy killed more sailors between the era of transatlantic exploration and the rise of steam power than combat, storms, and shipwrecks combined. Some estimates place the death toll in the millions. Faced with this crisis, the East India Company's surgeons settled on tamarind mixed into barley water as a preferred treatment by the 1630s. It was not an unreasonable guess at the time. Nobody yet understood vitamin C, and many remedies for scurvy were tried across different fleets, including citrus, malt, herbs, and various tonics. Some fleets even relied on things like sea kale or ginger, based on scattered observations, rather than any consistent scientific method. Tamarind's sourness likely made it feel medicinally plausible to physicians working without any real understanding of nutrition, since a sharp, acidic taste seemed like the kind of thing that should counteract a wasting illness. This is where the story reaches its turn, because tamarind's reputation as a scurvy remedy turned out to be a documented and consequential mistake. In 1747, the Scottish naval surgeon James Lind carried out what is widely regarded as one of the first controlled clinical trials in the history of medicine. Aboard the ship HMS Salisbury, Lind divided 12 sick sailors into 6 pairs and gave each pair a different treatment. One pair received cider, one received diluted sulfuric acid, one received vinegar, one received seawater, and one received a mixture that included garlic, mustard, and barley water treated with tamarind. Only the final pair received oranges and lemons. Within days, the sailors given citrus fruit showed clear recovery, while the others, including the pair given the tamarind mixture, did not improve in the same way. Lind's citrus fruit ran out within about a week, which limited the scope of his experiment, but the contrast was striking enough to point towards citrus as the effective treatment. Despite this result, it took decades for naval authorities to fully act on it, and tamarind-based remedies continued to be used and debated for years afterward. The wider medical and naval establishment was slow to abandon older assumptions, partly because Lind's own writing was cautious, and partly because entrenched practices are hard to dislodge, even in the face of evidence. The consequence of this delay was measured in human lives, since scurvy continued killing sailors long after a workable answer had already been demonstrated on that ship. Tamarind itself was not the villain of this story in any dramatic sense. It was one ingredient among many in a long, difficult, and often mistaken search for a cure, and it illustrates something important about medical history in general. Correlation, tradition, and plausibility are not the same as verified evidence, and for centuries the difference cost lives. This is a case where a widely used historical remedy needs to be stated clearly as ineffective for its intended purpose, not treated as a quaint footnote. It is a reminder that a remedy can be widely trusted, officially adopted by a major trading company, and still be wrong for a very long time before evidence finally catches up with it. While tamarind's medical reputation at sea was being quietly disproven, its culinary reputation on land kept growing. By the 19th century, tamarind had become an ingredient in one of the most recognizable condiments in the Western world. In the 1830s, 2 English chemists, John Wheely Leah and William Henry Perrins, working in a pharmacy in Worcester, England, developed a fermented sauce that would become known as Worcestershire sauce. Their early recipes are documented to have included tamarind alongside vinegar, anchovies, molasses, and spices. According to company law that spread through advertising in the following decades, the recipe supposedly came from a nobleman, sometimes identified as Lord Marcus Sandys, who was said to have brought it back after serving as governor of Bengal. Historical research, including a review by the company's own archivist, found no record that any Lord Sandys ever governed Bengal or traveled to India at all. The romantic origin story that has been repeated in advertising and popular retellings for close to 2 centuries appears to be exactly that, a story, not a documented historical fact. The real origin of the recipe remains unclear, and historians treat the nobleman legend as unverified rather than true. What can be verified is more mundane and, in its own way, more interesting. Tamarind extract remains a listed ingredient in Worcestershire sauce recipes to this day, quietly present in one of the most widely used condiments on the planet. From the 19th century onward, tamarind's spread only accelerated. Colonial trade networks, migration, and growing global food commerce carried it into new markets across Africa, the Middle East, the Americas, and Southeast Asia. Today, tamarind is cultivated commercially across dozens of countries. India remains the largest producer by volume, with production commonly estimated in the range of well over 100,000 metric tons per year. Thailand, Indonesia, and Mexico also produce substantial quantities, and much of Nigeria's production potential is considered largely undeveloped relative to its natural growing conditions. These figures vary between sources and should be treated as estimates rather than precise official counts, since agricultural reporting differs significantly by country and year. What is not in dispute is tamarind's reach. The fruit is now used in dishes and products across an estimated several dozen countries, spanning nearly every region where it can physically grow or be imported. Modern industrial food production has only deepened this reach, since tamarind extract and concentrate are now manufactured at scale and shipped to food companies that use them in sauces, candies, and beverages far removed from any tree. A single jar of tamarind concentrate produced in one country can end up flavoring products sold on shelves on the opposite side of the world, without most consumers ever seeing the raw fruit itself. Which brings this story to your own kitchen, whether you have ever noticed it or not. If you have ever shaken a bottle of Worcestershire sauce onto a steak or into a Bloody Mary, you have used tamarind. If you have eaten pad thai, you have almost certainly tasted tamarind paste, which gives the dish its signature sour edge. If you have eaten Filipino sinigang or Indian sambar or a tamarind-flavored Mexican candy dusted with chili and salt, tamarind was there, doing the same job it has done for thousands of years, cutting through richness. With sharp acidity, most people who eat these foods regularly have no idea that the sour pulp in their sauce or candy traces back to African savannas, ancient Sanskrit texts, medieval Arab trade routes, a failed naval medical experiment, and a British pharmacy with a made-up origin story. The tree that once sheltered conversations in African villages now flavors condiments in refrigerators on almost every continent, largely unnoticed and rarely credited. That quiet, almost invisible presence is arguably tamarind's real legacy. It was never the star ingredient people build a dish around the way they might with saffron or vanilla. It was the background note, the sour backbone, the thing that made other flavors work. Empires rose and fell, medical theories were proposed and disproven, and trade routes shifted across centuries, and through all of it, this small, sour fruit kept moving quietly from region to region, embedding itself into cuisines that otherwise share almost nothing in common. Few ingredients can claim a footprint that spans African oral tradition, ancient Indian scripture, Islamic medical texts, European naval history, and modern Mexican street food all at once. Consider how many separate, unconnected human stories had to happen in sequence for that to be true. An unnamed community in Africa first found a use for a bitter, pod-bearing tree. Traders crossing the Indian Ocean carried its seeds without leaving behind their names. A physician in medieval Persia wrote it into a medical encyclopedia that would be read for centuries. An English pharmacist mixed it into a sauce that outlived any memory of who actually asked for it. And a naval surgeon proved almost by accident that it could not do the one job people had trusted it to do for 100 years. None of these people were trying to build a global ingredient. They were solving immediate local problems, and tamarind simply carried forward with them each time. If this is the first time you have thought seriously about where your Worcestershire sauce or your tamarind candy actually comes from, you are not alone. Most people never do. That is exactly why this story is worth telling. If you want more deep dives like this one into the hidden history of everyday foods, subscribe so you do not miss the next episode. Let us know in the comments which part of tamarind's history surprised you the most, or tell us which everyday food or ingredient you want us to trace back next.